Hey everybody, it's Pastor Joseph here. I'm trying to get some fresh air outside. The forsythia are in bloom behind me here, and I wanted to share today's message with you and express or expand a little bit on what I've been talking about for the last few days about getting in touch with your true self. And I'm going back to my thinking about Ephesians 2:19, where it says that we are all citizens of God's kingdom, and we belong to God's family. And I want to tell you a little story that tells you how much the world has changed in the last 50 years. Or I think 100 years, it's even more magnified than that. But 50 years ago, I want to tell you about the neighborhood in which I grew up. The neighborhood in which I grew up was a predominantly Roman Catholic area. The school was 2 blocks from my house. I used to walk there. There was a playground. There was an amusement park not far from my house. Right behind my parents' house, there was a park. I remember when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, they had a block party, and the police department blocked off the streets. And on a hot summer night, we could go up and down the street freely, and people put out picnic tables right in the middle of the street, and it was a wonderful time. I knew when I was a little kid, my mom and dad told me about it, I knew the mailman. We used to look at ants in the driveway together. I've got a picture, an old slide of him and I think it was the mailman, looking at ants together in the yard, something a 5-year-old boy would do. I knew all my friends' phone numbers. I knew I was close enough with my bicycle to get to their houses. If someone lived far enough away that it was a drive, it was an enormous distance. The church in which I grew up in, Durand United Church of Christ, was at the end of our street. And the reason I tell you this story is that's not that long ago, 50 years ago. And the sense of identity which people had 50 years ago, neighborhoods, social associations, growing up in a Roman Catholic area, every Friday there was a fish fry put on by the Roman Catholic churches and the volunteer fire departments. I can remember the Roman Catholic church across the street where they brought in a carnival once a year in the summertime. There was a real sense of identity and a real sense of neighborhood. There was a real sense of who you were. And time was marked by particular occasions in the neighborhood's life, the block party, for instance, or the school Halloween parade where we would march around in the neighborhood from the elementary school. There was a real sense of identity that came from religion as well. There was a real sense of identity which came for some people from very strong ethnic identities, whether you were Italian or whether you were Polish. There were particular traditions, or German, that people had. And so finding your true self was a question of locating yourself in your neighborhood, locating yourself in your family connections and your family ties. Now, fast forward to today, and I don't really live in a neighborhood where we could close off the streets and have a block party. You don't probably live in a neighborhood where that's all that likely either. You probably don't know your mailman walking the beat. Or bring it down to the teenagers of today. A lot of our identity now is online. Teenagers practice their identity, putting themselves on Instagram and seeing which pictures they can manufacture to make them look best, to make them get the most hits, the most likes, the most acceptance. Making an identity now it's commodified, it's consumer oriented. How will people like me is the question that young people particularly are asking today, but it affects all of us. It affects us adults too. And we've seen some of the glue which kept our identities together go away as we've used these devices to become cynical, to become advertisers, basically, of our brand, of ourselves. What am I going to put on YouTube? What am I going to put on Facebook? How am I going to come off best in front of people? Rather than seeing them as just a communications device. I find this problematic. And I find it problematic because it creates another layer which Christians have to talk about. And I'm not saying this in a judgmental fashion. I'm just saying this in a compassionate fashion. That to get in touch with your true self is not about Facebook. It's not about this device that I hold in my hand. It's not about curating an image. It's got to be about more than that. And some of the losses that we've had of identity, some of the losses that we feel can only be captured not by doubling down on how we can get a filter that makes us look better on this kind of format. But one of the ways in which we can do this finding of our true self is to put down the electronic and to ask ourselves, who am I really? What do I really want? John Calvin, in his first line of the Institutes, which was his textbook for Reformed Christians that he wrote for Reformed pastors, said that all knowledge in the world comes from pretty much two sources, our knowledge of God and our knowledge of ourselves. And I think that's largely true, and they belong actually together, not separately. They're not separate from one another. But when we go inside of ourselves, we can find our true selves, and we can find God there as well. God's Spirit, anyway. So what I'm encouraging you to do is, whether you are someone who has sought identity through making a career, or you're someone who's a teenager who curates your identity on Facebook, or if you've reached a place where this coronavirus issue has created you to start questioning yourself and questioning others around you, is after this video is over, turn it off. Put the device down. And then go and spend some time quietly getting in touch with your true self. And what I mean by that is take a few deep breaths and ask yourself, what do I really want out of life? And when you've answered that question, go deeper. What do I really want out of life? Then when you've answered that question, go deeper. See if you can find the deepest sense of yourself in quiet and solitude. And then in that silence and solitude, ask God, what is it that you really want from me and that I really want from myself? Spend 2 or 3 minutes wrestling with that question. It may take a while. It may take, I don't know, weeks, months maybe, to get a good answer to that question, but I do know that God hears it. That it's a moment to be quiet and to figure out what it means to be a citizen of heaven. Frederick Buechner, a Christian author, says that your calling is where the world's great need and your desire meets. I think that's a pretty good definition. You'll kind of know it and feel it when you found it. That's my prayer for you this day. Tomorrow I'll be leading us through some centering prayer just to remind us where we're going, where we've been. As I said, I've taught centering prayer to third and fourth graders at Living Waters Camp, thinking that they would not like it, and they loved it. That's one way of getting in touch with your true self. And stay on this station, watch for it. I'm hoping most days, if not daily, so far we're keeping up a pretty good track record, to be providing you with spiritual tips and tricks to keep you focused during this very different time for us. Thanks a lot, everybody. I've been keeping you in my prayers. I hope you're all doing well. Remember to comment below. I'm just a phone call or a message away. Miss seeing you all, but we will see each other again soon. All right. Keep the faith. Be good citizens in God's world, and we'll talk to you soon. Blessings, everybody.